we believe that you can make it with Jesus. And how many know you can't do it without him? Jesus himself said, without me you can do nothing. So we want to stay connected to Jesus and trust him that he will never leave us nor forsake us. Thank you, choir. Thank you, choir. It is indeed a great honor and privilege to be here with you today, sharing the Word of God. Once again, I want to thank your pastor, Pastor Banks, for the opportunity to stand here in this pulpit. You know, I've never been to Pleasant Green before, but I feel I know you guys because every once in a while I'll check you out on the cable access. I've seen some of your services online. I know this, that between Pastor Banks and Reverend Page, you guys don't get cheated in this pulpit. These men of God bring the Word, and so I'm just honored to stand here today and share with you today. I forgot one thing when I was sharing about our ministry I need to mention. We have a banquet coming up on Monday, April 23rd. It's at the Hilton downtown across from the CenturyLink Center. And this banquet is free of charge. It is a wonderful opportunity to get exposed to our ministry. You'll hear some inmates and their testimonies and hear what God is doing behind the walls. So if that's something that interests you, we just want to invite you to come to that banquet. And we have, if you don't get a chance to talk with me or Chaplain Stevens afterward, our brochure has all of our contact information on it. So I just needed to let you know about that banquet. We'd love to see you there on April 23rd. It's time for the Word of God. Would you stand to your feet as we read the Word? We're going to be looking at the book of Daniel. Daniel chapter 1. And I'm going to read into your hearing the first 8 verses. I urge you to stay open to that text because we'll be referring to some other verses of that later on in the message. But we'll start off with the first 8 verses from the book of Daniel. The book of Daniel reads this way. In the 3rd year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem and besieged it. And the Lord gave Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into his hand, with some of the articles of the house of God, which he carried into the land of Shinar to the house of his God. And he brought the articles into the treasure house of his God. Then the king, Nebuchadnezzar, instructed Ashpenaz, the master of his eunuchs, to bring some of the children of Israel and some of the king's descendants and some of the nobles, young men in whom there was no blemish, but good-looking, gifted in all wisdom, possessing knowledge and quick to understand, who had ability to serve in the king's palace, and whom they might teach the language and literature of the Chaldeans. And the king appointed for them a daily provision of the king's delicacies, of the wine which he drank, and 3 years of training for them, so that at the end of that time they might serve before the king. Now from among those of the sons of Judah were Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. To them the chief of the eunuchs gave names. He gave Daniel the name Belteshazzar, to Hananiah Shadrach, to Mishael Meshach, and to Azariah Abednego. But Daniel purposed in his heart that he would not defile himself with the portion of the king's delicacies, nor with the wine which he drank. But Daniel purposed in his heart that he would not defile himself with the portion of the king's delicacies. I want to preach from the topic this morning, living in your second choice world. Living in your second choice world. You may be seated. You know, I've talked on this topic and taught on this topic in the jail many times, but I believe that it applies to all walks of life, to all people in all walks of life. The second choice world. Sometimes we find ourselves living in that second choice world. And what do I mean by that? I mean it's a place that you would rather not be. It's a place maybe you never thought you'd be. A place you look around and say, how did I get here? And what am I doing here? You never thought you'd get laid off from your job. You never thought you'd have this health issue. You never thought you'd go through a divorce. You never thought you'd fall short of your dreams and goals. You never thought that life would be so disappointing for you. But one day you woke up and you asked, what happened? This is not what I chose for my future. I'm living in a second choice world. And as we look at the text today, the people of God are living in a second choice world. The nation of Judah is attacked by Babylon and their mighty king Nebuchadnezzar. And these people have been conquered. It's part of God's discipline and judgment upon their lives, but they've been conquered. And some of them, including Daniel and his friends, have been taken into exile, taken hundreds of miles away, ripped out of their own country and taken to a foreign place. And truth be told, living in a second choice world, brothers and sisters, can be emotionally painful, can it not? You may have to battle through anger and disappointment and despair and depression. And someone wrote a psalm about life in this second choice world we're reading about today. Psalm 137. It reads this way, by the rivers of Babylon, we sat and wept when we remembered Zion. There on the poplars we hung our harps, for there our captors asked us for songs. Our tormentors demanded songs of joy, and they said, sing us one of the songs of Zion. But how can we sing the songs of the Lord in a foreign land? And maybe that's the question somebody has here this morning. How can I sing the songs of the Lord in the second choice world that I find myself in? How can I be joyful in the place that I am in life right now? And I believe that there is something in the book of Daniel that will help us to deal with life in the second choice world. Because certainly Daniel was in that second choice world. And understand this morning as you look at the text that Daniel was probably a teenager at this time. Some Bible scholars say he was as young as 15 years old. Imagine that. And he was among the best and the brightest of all the young men of Judah. It mentions here that they were from the nobility, from the upper class. They were good looking, they were smart, they were well educated, they had a bright future, they were emerging leaders. When their world was suddenly and dramatically shattered and changed. And the goal now from King Nebuchadnezzar was to assimilate these young men into being leaders in Babylonian culture. They were to learn the language and the literature and the customs of Babylon. He wanted to make them good Babylonians who would grow up to be loyal to Babylon instead of rising up in rebellion against Babylon. And not only did Daniel have to face the disappointment of living in a second choice world, Daniel had his faith severely tested in this second choice world. You see, religion was important to the Babylonians. They worshipped many gods, they worshipped idols, and they were trying to influence Daniel and his friends to give up their God, Jehovah, and to worship their gods. And even their names were changed as part of this assimilation to Babylonian culture. You see, all the names of the four Hebrews in some way honored their God, Yahweh, or Jehovah. For example, the name Daniel means God is my judge. And Hananiah means the Lord shows grace. But if you notice, their new Babylonian names all contain references to Babylonian gods. The king was saying to these young men, you are now under my authority, and you will be serving and worshiping new gods. And these young men faced an even greater challenge because the king was going to entice them not with torture and deprivation. He was going to entice them and train them with good living in the palace. He was going to give them the best from his table, the best food and the best wine. And this raised a big problem for these young devout Hebrew men. The food would most likely be offered to Babylonian gods, which they were forbidden to eat. So what are the options for Daniel in his second choice world? What are the choices that Daniel has? He could go ahead and eat the king's food. He's a long ways from home. He's a long ways from his support system, from his pastor, from his parents, if you will. He could have expressed anger and disappointment to God, saying, you know what, God? If you really cared for me, you would never have placed me in this situation. If you really loved me, I wouldn't be in this second choice world. I might as well enjoy the king's food because I'm entitled to it. I don't have nothing else right now.